Presentation. Thank you all for coming earlier than scheduled today to go through a presentation that we have. We're looking to review some of the things that we found with our Central Lewis County water study that we've been working on for the past, 3 years now. These are Miller engineers. They're here to present some information for you, to give you a recap of things that they found, improvements that they've identified municipal-wise and potentially for the county. So I will turn it over to Doug Miller of Miller Engineers, and he can get the ball rolling with everybody.
Yeah.
Hey guys, how are you? Good. Hey, good afternoon. My name is good to see you.
Yes, guys, thanks.
Good afternoon. I'm President and owner of Miller Engineers. We're kind of a niche specialty firm out of the Syracuse area, and it's been a pleasure working with Cassandra and Ryan and crew up here on the water study. We're at a point where we want to get you folks up to speed and interactive with all the communities. Watson, Town of Lowville, Town of Denmark, Martinsburg, Village of Copenhagen. And I'm going to eventually turn it over to Terry Brown. He's been our project manager here. Terry will run through some slides, and then we'll open up for questions. And we're really interested to see what you folks, think is, what the next step should be. We've got some opinions. We've been working with Ryan and Cassandra on that, and that'll come through. But what I wanted to tell you is we've put together a team specific for this work. And these are the people, the key people that have been working on this. Terry's been the project manager. Neil Murphy's been our #1 technical advisor. He was a former president at SUNY ESF, and he was a former CEO at O'Brien & Gear. Terry was also has followed in Neil's steps, and he was the CEO at O'Brien & Gear. And when these guys were in charge, O'Brien & Gear was one of the premier engineering companies in the country, consistently up in the top 10, and predominantly in water quality and development of programs such as what we're working with you folks with. If you Google Mr. Murphy, you'll see that he is Mr. Water. So with that, I'll turn it over. And I guess the other thing is, the way I know these guys is they're both my former mentors and bosses, friends and colleagues. And it's been a pleasure doing this. And our contact information with Cassandra, afterwards, if you have any questions or anything, by all means, contact us, because we're all pretty much interactive in everything going on here. The other thing I don't think Terry had on there, he wouldn't toot his own horn, but Terry's also a former trustee at Clarkson University. So with that,
I don't hold that against him.
I was just gonna say the same thing.
I don't need it. So with that, I'll turn it over to Terry, and I'll let him run with it, and then we'll open it up, and hopefully we get some good discussion going.
Well, thanks, Doug, and thanks everyone for taking the time. Every time I have to sit through a presentation, I kind of looked at the end and see how many slides, and I said, oh my God, there's 28 slides here. And I'm kind of the one who likes to, you can read as well, so I think we'll go relatively fast because we really want to get to the end. And that's what's really important to get a discussion. But here's our, initial study goals, for the project. And similar and parallel to what was done in Southern Lewis County, and that report, which was done, was a very good report. So we spent a lot of time in the communities, talking to individuals. And the goals were basically simply to evaluate the existing conditions of the public water systems, including the age, infrastructure, the capacities, the demand, historical and current improvements, current water rates, debt service, budget, potential community water system connections to promote economic, or basically promote and sustain beneficial economic development, as well as promote sustainable population growth in areas that are currently not served. Now, the one thing in the opportunity we talk about where we are now, we all know there's going to be an infrastructure bill. And we all know there's going to be a lot of money that's flowing to help make some of these improvements. And the one thing that I found when we started talking some of the specifics in the report related to population growth. You know, in Lewis County and upstate New York, you know, the population's been kind of steady over the last 20, 30 years. But I got a strong belief that what's happened in the last year and a half, those communities that offer safety, they're safe, a good quality of life for the residents, have a strong school system, and have a strong internet, which you folks I know are working on, are going to be very attractive with climate change and what's happening in the southern communities. So the opportunity is, you know, I think you're going to see a population growth if you want that in the future, and particularly with industrial growth. Neil will speak to that a little bit, but you know, in the Southwest, they're having problems with water, and predictions are they're going to run out of water. So where are they going to come? It's going to be in the Northeast. So a lot of this, as we go through, when we get to the end of the discussion, is going to be how you can position yourselves to attract these businesses and other members to come here if that's what you want. So we spent a lot of time. We have awful lot of details, and Neil's going to run through that. But the study area was basically Watson, Martinsburg, Wildville, and Denmark, and then the village of Copenhagen came on later in the study. And you can see this is not very good, but those blue lines are the extent of the water lines in each of these communities. There's a lot of distance between the communities that someday in the future, and one of our recommendations with this money, infrastructure money coming and grants, potentially how can we make those connections, particularly with Watson, who has a new groundwater well system and treatment system and storage tank. They got some water that would be useful. So those are some of the concepts we'll talk later on. So Neil's going to run through some of our study.
How's everybody doing?
Okay,
Good.
I'll walk through and tell you a little bit about each of the towns in terms of their system. And then we'll talk about solutions to some of those issues.
I think your first slide's got a misprint.
I think, you know, I was looking at these slides and I think there are probably 2 or 3.
The village of Lowell's water is surface water from the Black River.
You're absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
You
the
know,
other
it's
thing
one
I
of the
want to highlight,
things-
they opted out, but did you actually deal with them some or talk to the village at all? I know they weren't one of the 5 that you listed.
We didn't directly talk
You
to
did,
the
okay.
village,
Thank you.
but we're aware of some of the difficulties too. You know, always when you have a surface water supply, you tend to have organics in that surface water supply. And a lot of those are just natural products from leaves and decaying leaves and that kind of thing. But it can lead to the development of chlorinated disinfection byproducts. And that's an issue, for example, they have, and as we'll talk, each one of these systems has its own characteristic advantages and problems. You know, we'll talk a little bit about groundwater. Depending upon where the groundwater is taken, there are, for example, some isotopes of radium, radium-226 and radium-228. For those of you that are a little on the science side, they're alpha emitters, but they create their own sets of problems too. So there are solutions to those, solutions to the byproducts from disinfection, solutions basically to the radium isotopes that are trace levels basically in groundwater. Now, the town of Lowellville, you know, as we were talking, there is a surface water source, the Black River. They have a 200,000 gallon water storage tank. It's interesting to look at the storage tank and the storage tank volumes, because the standard in the industry is you should have a storage tank that can hold basically 5 days of water. And so you'll see that one of our recommendations in certain of these areas, some of these water districts are going to need additional storage to meet that, both for firefighting and covering drought periods. As I mentioned, the water quality issues with the town of Loudville have to do with trihalomethanes that are coming from the Black River. When you disinfect or you chlorinate the water, you form these trihalomethanes and other chlorinated organics. They're moving forward with treatment technology to address the trihalomethanes that is being addressed through a consent order by New York State Department of Health. And the town of Loudville, their water system is largely operated by the town of Loudville Highway Department. This is also going to be an issue we'll talk about later on in terms of training people so that they have the full gamut of skills to operate a water treatment and distribution system. Now, town of Watson, their water is sourced from the village of Loudville. So again, we would expect, and we have found, that the water quality issues there also include the trihalomethanes and trihaloacetic acid. The water distribution extensions and new water storage tank have recently been completed, as well as a recently commissioned well field. So it gives them a lot of flexibility, and frankly, they can be a source of water to adjacent communities because currently they have excess capacity. We're out to see their new facilities, and they're in very good shape. And we wish that all the communities were as up to date as town of Watson. Town of Denmark sources drinking water from both a source surface water and a groundwater source. Water supply is limited. Again, they have a combination of things. The town of Denmark has elevated THMs. As we said, that's because of the surface supply part of their sourcing. And they also have high iron, magnesium, and a range of sulfur compounds that are associated with the groundwater source. In that area of the county, it is the groundwater is overlain by limestone. We were just briefly talking about that. In some areas, that limestone is fractured and has solution cavities that basically is a vehicle for getting some surface contamination into the groundwater. Now, it's not across the whole aquifer, but just in isolated areas. And the village of Copenhagen wells aren't able to meet the demand during periods of drought. I think it was 2016 or 2017 where they had to truck in water, and that led to a consent order from the Department of Health to get a true source that would carry them through drought periods. Village of Copenhagen, served by two well fields, the Stoddard Road well field, and also the Wood Battle Road system. During the drought, 2016, the system simply couldn't meet the demands for water for the village. So again, they had to truck in water. And they have now that administrative order from the Department of Health to find a solution. Now,
Does that have a sunset clause to it, that order from Department of Health?
usually Department of Health administrative orders don't have a sunset clause. If anything, they have an initiation clause.
Yeah.
We want this initiated by a certain date. The Wood Battle Roads system has, the wells there have poor groundwater quality. It's just not what that community deserves. It deserves a higher quality of water. And again, iron, manganese, and also a range of sulfates and sulfides in the water. And we reviewed three options for them. We did basically a comparison of those three options to see what would be the best long-term option for the village of Copenhagen. And we concluded that basically, and have completed a conceptual design to source water from the village of West Carthage. And that would involve, and we've done a conceptual design of a connecting pipeline, a storage tank, and a pump station. Now, our estimate and this is off a conceptual design, is that would cost about $4.5 million. That's whereas my colleague will be talking, has talked about the infrastructure bill. We need to get some applications out to try and cover as many of these capital costs as we possibly can. Town of Martinsburg, 5 groundwater wells serve the town of Martinsburg, and they have 189,000 gallon storage tank. But District 2 of their system is served by the village of Loudon. So again, that District 2 served area has these trihalomethanes, these chlorinated organics. And the Glenfield Water District is served by 2 groundwater wells. And the Glenville Water District has a 260,000 gallon water storage, a good sized water storage. Now, groundwater in the long haul appears to be the best bet for the central part of Lewis County. And a study was done by Bergman Associates, and this was done in 2008, and they identified 6 zones that had the greatest potential for developing a good groundwater supply. And you can see these noted on the table to the left, and you can see them in the hashed areas on the map. And those should be looked at by the county over the long haul as a good source of water for the future. Now, water has, and Terry Brown briefly spoke to you about this, water has tremendous economic development benefits associated. As Terry mentioned, you look to the southwest, you see the Colorado River at the lowest level it's been in since the system was created, system of dams were created. And there are economic benefits to Lewis County for its water resources. In addition to a quality workforce with a strong work ethic, which the county is known for, the quality of life is, with strong educational opportunities, is a lure for people from, for example, from the New York metropolitan area to be purchasing property. And there's an abundance of water quality resources. Those water quality resources are very important because, as I frequently say, water will be the economic currency of the future. If you think about the fact that to produce a pair of jeans, I normally would have a pair of jeans on, I don't. It takes 1,200 gallons of water to produce a pair of jeans. A single chip, for example, and there are, I think I remember 100 computer chips in a classic automobile today. A single chip takes 2,000 gallons of water involved in its production, from the standpoint of washing, the multiple coatings, all that kind of stuff. So in communities that have water are going to be in value in the future. And a little thing, am I going too long?
No.
A little thing is relative to climate change. There was a study that was done by NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Administration, called the Climate Report. And they concluded that the best place to live, and they're talking about in the United States, to avoid the ravages of climate change, north of the 40th parallel, which is the New York State-Pennsylvania border, and ultimately in the Great Lakes Basin. Why? Because you may go through a little drought period, but you're going to have the amount of water resources that you need, and temperatures are moderated. Now, this is going to make Lewis County very attractive. We've seen, again, metropolitan areas under stress due to economic downturns. People are looking to get out of those areas. The pandemic has accelerated. So this can be a big asset by finding state and federal funds that can increase basically the capacity and the quality of and the publicity of the water resources in Lewis County could be very, very important. My colleague Terry Brown will go through some of the.
So I'll go through this, rather quickly, so we can get into what our real recommendation, what we really want to discuss today. But we were talking about the population projected to decline. That's projections, but I personally don't believe it. From what I've seen, from people that I know that are actually moving out of the metropolitan areas and coming up to upstate New York, there's been a lot. If they can Zoom their meetings, if they can use the internet, they don't have to necessarily travel to metropolitan New York City. They can do it from their home. And there are a lot of people that have moved out of the metropolitan area. At one time, I think it was well over 500,000 people have exited just New York City alone. And so there's a potential for growth. So there's a growth in demand. Will be expanding of service areas and new industrial use. Water systems are widely dispersed geographically here, and the operational staff are integrated into other functions within their municipal operations. So in a lot of cases, they might be shorthanded and have to do dual duties, and they have to make a choice. In the town of Wildville, the highway superintendent is the main operator of the water treatment system. If it's snowing, there's a problem, they have to shuffle their personnel around. And what takes more of a priority. In the short term, current plans for individual municipalities for system improvements should continue to move forward to comply with existing administrative orders. The town of Wildville has already done that with their activated carbon system is up and it should be online and operating related to those that administrative order. In the long term, municipal water system should consider relying on groundwater resources for future supply needs, which Neil discussed. Integral water system district should need to implement greater system treated water storage, which Neil had mentioned that as well. Previous study indicated the groundwater resources of Lewis County has sufficient capacity to provide high quality water. Groundwater supplies should be analyzed for the presence of radium isotopes, identified as potential concerns as part of an overall evaluation. Consideration should be given to consolidated water service districts. Source and existing infrastructure can support increased services. And we're going to talk a lot about that later on. Wisconsin should consider assisting in identification of potential groundwater sources, and we recommend the future supply study, phase 2 study of those, what their sources could be. Common shared supply could potentially offer reduced supply costs to each municipality, user and facility and service areas expansion, which again we want to talk about at the end. The growth is opportunity is there. Water supplies systems relying on surface water sources should implement source water granular activated carbon treatment to convert to an alternate disinfection system to reduce the probability of formation of disinfection byproducts. Talked about the wells in 6 zones, upgrade to the water distribution system. And these are recommendations. So upgrades to the water distribution system, starting with a Route 12 corridor. Again, this wouldn't take very much to get a grant application and to do that. Additional water storage system storage with a minimum of 5 days storage. That should be analyzed and see where money would be available to provide that. Consider integration where possible water supply systems to provide the best possible service to the residents of Lewis County. We're going to talk about that later on and have a discussion. And then upgrades to portable water treatment systems. So we talked about that. And consider the creation of a water board to oversee systems. That's pretty important. We're going to talk about that as well. In general guidance, public water supplies or groundwater sources, we know implementation of well protection practices. In some cases, it was weak. Annual inspections of the well field for adjacent land use changes. We certainly You want to make sure that there's nothing that's changed that's going to pollute your wells. Conduct well and piping inspections, looking for corrosions and biofilm development, which we have seen in the area. The application of GPR for solution cavities and fracture. Public water supplies with surface water sources, analyze surface water sources quarterly for changes in nutrient concentrations, inspection of surface water resources for signs of increased algae activity, development of water quality management plans to protect the quality of source water, and the development of source water monitoring water programs to provide an early warning of the potential increases in the source of contaminations. And we've talked about stimulate economic development, upgrade and integrate water systems, provide training for the system operators using the current programs offered by American Water Works Association. That's pretty important. And consideration should be given to commission a site selector to attract new business and businesses that need water and power. And I know that I think there's a relationship, Sandra, you said, with Center State CEO down in Syracuse, which covers this region. That could be helpful if that's something you want to do. And that's a part of their mission to attract business. More technical data. The one thing on here known as installation of a SCADA system with sensors for pressure, system pressure, recording residual, detect potential system losses, and adequate coordination. This is a big part of our recommendation as we move forward. We think all the water treatment systems should have a SCADA system. It should be, and for the recommendation, should be tied into a local place that can be reviewed by a professional engineer. So we're going to talk about the SCADA systems. Talk about that. SCADA system is simple as PLC. It gets data, and we have these points in a system that can identify problems and can, in my mind, can save an awful lot of labor and be predictive of a problem in the system. So you can react versus reactive. Okay, so going back to, we have here, over the years, I think in your office, we probably have 3 FIDO reports. And the one that was most interesting for me was the one that was conducted by O'Brien and Gear in 1972.
I wonder why.
So it actually predates my time by a few years. So the county's been studying this for a long time. It's interesting, they studied every water distribution, water treatment system in the county at that time. They did look at consolidation in districts. Didn't necessarily recommend it, they didn't think that was feasible at the time. There's been a whole host of other reports, and we completed our report that's under review just for these 3 towns, and it's great bedtime reading with a lot of data. And then the Southern Lewis County Regional Water Feasibility Study, which is very well done for the towns in the southern portion of Lewis County. But they came up basically, the recommendation from their study, the preferred method of implementing the goals and recommendation of this study is through the creation of a regional water resources agency or similar entity.
Are you gonna talk to how you form one of those things?
Yeah.
But nobody wants that?
Nobody wants it, yeah. We're gonna talk about that.
Okay, good.
So it's Miller Engineers' recommendation that a Lewis County Water Treatment and Distribution District be developed. The district would facilitate intermunicipal capital projects to optimize water use and development of administrative common supply source, improve system operations by facilitating sharing of resources, provide backup certified operator resources when needed. There's a whole host of other things that we can talk about. I'm going to skip this because talked about most of this stuff. I'm gonna skip presentation discussion. But this is what we really want to talk about in the recommendation. And there's gonna be a lot of discussion, in the future, and I know Ryan, we talked about this, but we really feel strongly that at the end of the, when you look out, and this is a 50 to 60, 100-year look. It's not just today or, 10 years down the road, but the mission said, we think that the Lewis County Water Treatment and Distribution Countywide District should be established. And the mission would be treatment and distribution district, which focuses on improving water quality and resiliency to improve the quality of life and economic vitality for the residents of Lewis County. And we have these goals and objectives: to establish a county-wide water district, to establish a water department with a department head that will support quality of life improvements for the county residents and improve water resources to stimulate economic growth, set district policies, control county-wide operations, maintenance, operator training, certification, joint functions of all systems, identify the needs for the water distribution systems, water treatment upgrades, expansion to improve long-range planning, capital improvements, financing, and grant applications, provide regulatory compliance and reporting requirements to include in the reports, vulnerability assessments, and overall water quality reporting requirements, conduct bulk purchasing of parts, equipment, chemicals, services required, and undertake the design, installation of SCADA systems. That's an awful lot, and these are all things that the current operators in all these communities have to deal with. And the regulations and, quite frankly, the fiduciary responsibilities for those communities is pretty high. And for the board members, the trustees, position to oversee this. So we're recommending really that you a department, which this all has to be defined, and how you do it all has to be defined, and go through and get a lot of buy-in, a lot of discussion, because you got towns that currently don't have water and say, what are you doing? Are you expecting me to pay for any of this? And all that stuff has to be worked out. But, there's a lot of fiduciary responsibility when someone's water isn't right. And I always refer back to Flint, Michigan. And so, in my belief, when you put this all together, when you sit down, you gotta do the finances, you gotta make sure that the best we can, that it's not impacting anyone negatively. We would hope the village will come along to see the benefits. Because, my biggest fear related to the industry that you have in any community, we know what happens at those boardrooms, and they can make a decision to shut something down in a minute. So we gotta make sure that water quality is always there, and you're not gonna have any restricted water use that's occurring in a community that scares industries. You wanna be the best that you provide for your industries and your businesses. So that's key. So this is a heavy lift. It's not easy. And I think, Doug, you know where it's been done, in the past. It's, what we're talking about right now was done in Onondaga County in 1960 and 1970. And you can see the advantages of that county.
Yeah, literally, the investment was made to put a 72-inch main, basically up to Lake Ontario, along with a treatment plant on Lake Ontario, to open up the water resources. Resulted in Miller locating, Bristol-Myers Squibb expanding, Anheuser-Busch locating. It just went on and on and on. It just created an extraordinary amount of economic activity.
I lost one slide here. Take me to the end. Okay, I wanted to go to year one implementation. So our recommendation, first year, is begin and complete the process of forming Lewis County Water Treatment District execute intermunicipal agreements with the municipalities having existing water treatment and distribution systems. So those are the shared services, and some already exist. Develop operating agreements for the Carthage and West Carthage Commission to provide up to 40,000 gallons of water to the village of Copenhagen. Establish a Lewis County government, and hire the department head in the first year. In year 2, hold a referendum officially forming the Lewis County Water District, pursue funding for identified interconnection projects, initiate the phase 2 groundwater study, define or design and identify interconnection projects, implement SCADA systems throughout the county, implement the identified THM and radium abatement projects, initiate design of the Carthage water, West Carthage connecting pipeline, pump station, and storage tanks in year 2, and then construction of Carthage waters, Carthage connecting water line and water storage tank in year 3. And then 4 and 5, add system storage, identified public water, for the identified public water systems, and design and construct additional interconnection projects. So this is something that all needs to be mapped out. Again, it's a heavy lift, but I think it's what we're talking about what everybody's thoughts are.
So I have one comment to add. Reading directly from the Southern Lewis Water Study, which we spent $300,000 on, then we spent $300,000 on this water study. Ultimately, a collaborative regional approach to the region's water system should be seriously considered. A water resource agency or similar entity is a preferred means to long-term optimization of the region's water supply. You guys go to all your town and village board meetings. Is there a village, I'm not gonna put you on the spot, but think to yourselves, is there a village or town in Lewis County that is doing a good job with water right now? So that's why, 2 different studies with 2 different expert firms have come to the same conclusion that, our towns and villages are very small, and providing water in New York State has become really difficult. There's a lot of regulations, there's a lot of environmental considerations. And, having an overarching entity that can pull things together and, land some of these grants and get some of these projects going, is something that they feel we should consider. So, I'll turn it over to you guys.
Has there been any work effort, thought, or an estimate of what it would cost for the county to combine all these water systems and administer a collective water system?
I think that's our next step.
That's the last
Right.
slide.
And I think, the other thing to think about is, some of the bullet points is, in the long term, one of the things that we would look at would be, we showed maybe the ability to interconnect some of the systems. And with an overarching entity such as the county doing that, it makes it an inexpensive goal to make that happen, right? And I think as we move forward, the other thing to look at would be development of what, basically in a small term, we would call a map planning report. And we would have to work through the details of, what the economic benefits to each community that themselves would be, right? So, those are the type of things that would happen in the next phase. But, there are other things in here. Terry showed a slide or I think Neil showed the slide where there are all these large areas of groundwater. And when we talk to each community has tried to go out and look at this on their own. If there was an overarching entity that could kind of do that for them. And then once they got that, interconnect, the classic, and if you get into our report, which was good sleeping material, you could see that maybe one of the first projects to interconnect could be in Watson, right? And I don't, I'm just kind of talking out loud, but now you could start to level costs internal to an organization, right? If somebody had higher water costs, they could sell that water a lot more easily going through that hierarching county entity instead of going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And, you know, it really looks like it would be, you know, quite the benefit. And if you look, and, you know, Neil and I have worked on projects over the last 30, 40 years up and down the thruway in upstate New York. Outside of the North Country, the communities that have done this, and there are all kinds of different mechanisms to do it. And I think here, you know, a county mechanism is the best thing. But you look at the communities that have really taken off, and they did this 20, 30 years ago, and you don't find, in the community, and I say communities, right? I mean, regions. Sometimes it's multiple county areas. Sometimes it's just one county area. But what you'll see is where they've done this, it's really spurred, I don't know what word I can grab.
A lot of growth.
Yeah.
If you look at, for example, Monroe County, Rochester, they have the Monroe County Water Authority, and they have the Shoremount plant, and they manage basically all of the delivery pipelines for water basically in the whole county. It looks as though we may be doing some work for Seneca County. Seneca County equally has a county water district. They're looking at that as a model, so that they themselves can follow a similar type of path. And if most of the counties in upstate New York are generally moving in this direction, they get the really technical expertise located at the county level, and then provides that service throughout the county.
I have a question, and you might have just touched on what your logic was, and then maybe a follow-up comment. So the question, and this is definitely short-term, is what's the thought on hiring that department head, that professional engineer up front prior to getting the communities on board? And again, you might have just hit that one, but.
I think that's part of putting the whole map planning report together, right? I mean, I don't, you know, some of these things kind of move, you know, down the board. So I don't know if there's a real.
I think having a point person, for lack of other words, at the county level to start the process, help getting the intermunicipal agreements together. I think that would be very, very useful.
Yeah, and so then the follow-up thought, and I'm sure many of you think the same thing, and I think what everyone needs to think about is, and this might be live and publicized, but what's it gonna take to try and get our communities to decide to cooperate? That's,
I think a number of them have already started. They may not be talking about it, but when you get, I believe there are 4 administrative orders from the New York State Department of Health, and that creates angst. How are we going to respond to this? What are we going to do? You know, that kind of thing. And if that person can demonstrate the value of helping them to work through those administrative orders as one of the first tasks, I think it would be welcome.
Let me give you an example of what some of us here at the table are experiencing. You did the Central Lewis County Water Study.
Yeah.
I represent 80% of the village alone. I went to their meetings. I explained to them that in this, they could get about $40,000 or $50,000 worth of free reviews, estimates, and all that. They voted 100% to opt out of this, not coming here.
Yep.
So I mean, that's some of where we're at. We're dealing with people that got their feet dug in. What you're saying, I agree 100% with. But I think our challenge is when we go out there and say, okay, we want to take it over as a county. Again, I agree 100% with that. When you got a company or a village that votes 100% against joining a free study that they can get money from, that's what we're facing. And we're going to need help with that piece.
Yeah, I think you have to take one step at a time.
Yep.
You have to build trust.
Yep.
The communities have to recognize the value that they're getting. A whole bunch of things, you know. The operators, when an operator has to report to the village highway garage one day and then has to do something else, you know,
The Department of Health is allowing that because they license these operators, is my understanding, unless it's changed.
Not all the operators
Not
are
all.
licensed.
No kidding.
Harry, that was one of the arbs issues.
Yeah,
I have,
Oh,
go ahead.
What, I'm just curious what the, if there is such a thing as the specific reason, I guess I'm asking you this question, Jim. The specific reason these people are coalesced like this and don't wanna get out in the world and do the darn thing, what's holding them back?
just what some of these gentlemen have said with Lowell, they perceive that as power. The fact that they've got water.
Control.
I don't think they understand that surface water in our lifetime is not gonna be there anymore, folks. You're gonna need aquifers and groundwater, and, you know, we're not the only ones in this. Watertown's gonna be in the same shape. They're taking water out of the Black River, shipping it all the way to Fort Drum and back, yeah, so.
So one of the first things that these guys are recommending is if we do decide to kind of put ourselves out there and provide some county leadership, we would try to identify those groundwater sources and potentially start to build out some infrastructure to start extracting those groundwater sources. That is significantly better and cheaper water than a lot of what our towns and villages have now.
Oh, yeah.
So if we present that as an alternative, then we may be surprised that, you know, the attitudes might change a little bit.
If we go with a public referendum and that doesn't pass, what's the next step? I don't want to be gloom and gloom, I'm just offering some thoughts that are definitely out
I
there.
think you're gonna wind up having a number of the water districts that are gonna be, probably spend more of their financial resources on consultants to solve
Oh, yeah,
problems.
you talked about a fairly insignificant amount of money, but for some of these towns, $5,000 is a heck of a lot of money in their budget, so to me, that would be a selling point for the county to absorb some of that and blend it throughout the.
but I think, you know, we go through and do the financial analysis,
Yeah.
because you got debt service and
Oh,
different,
yeah.
you know, you gotta worry about that. And just the fact, you know, who writes the reports for the villages and how often do they call another engineer?
Oh, yeah.
If you have, you know, this professional group from the county that's overseeing this, the regulations, the meetings with the Department of Health, it takes that burden off of them,
So, yeah.
you know?
Well, it does, yeah.
They'll still, you know, they still can have their own engineer that they prefer, but they're gonna, in my mind, with a SCADA system, and you're proactive, there's payback. And I think as we develop this concept, we gotta put those numbers together,
Yeah.
and it has to be economically feasible. If it doesn't make,
That's the big
if
selling.
someone says, you know, you're gonna spend $200-300 more a year for your water, well, that's gonna, you know, people aren't gonna buy that.
What did Watson do? Because you folks are familiar with Watson.
Sure.
They did put a burden on their taxpayers, I believe.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
it's a big burden.
Oh, yes.
And they all raised their hand
We're
and
paying
said,
for something we
we're
don't have.
happy.
Yeah. And their concern is the level of debt that they're carrying.
Yeah.
You know, I think assistance there, you know, again, if there's gonna be another development like that, let's get some state money. Let's make sure we've got the Regional Economic Development Council advocating for the county or the community to get resources. Let's make sure that Schumer's after money in the infrastructure bill for Lewis County.
What are the odds of that?
I'd say it's good.
That Lewis County would get some substantial monies in the infrastructure bill?
I have some,
Now, does your company aid in that effort?
yes.
Are you successful usually?
We're currently administering about $27 million worth of grants in the water industry, water and wastewater.
I think it goes back to one,
Go ahead, Eric.
one of the things they've mentioned a couple times. I mean, there's gonna be a demand in the future because there's a shortage other places and we've got a good resource. So hopefully you sell that story and the money could come our way.
When you're talking to groundwater wells, what would you hope that they would produce in gallons?
I mean, it really depends upon the aquifer. You have to really do a pump test.
Well, just a general.
You could easily get a couple of million gallons out of maybe a well field that might have 3 or 4 wells
A couple of million gallons a year or a day?
a day.
A day.
Yeah, what's the village allowing, 1.5 million a day?
Yeah,
You know, I think if you could double that with new capacity,
yeah.
that'd be great.
What's Watson's?
What would be,
Go ahead, Phil.
I'm sorry, I'll stop.
Go ahead. I was wondering what Watson's was because they've already done some of that work for us, so I thought that might give us an idea.
Well, I don't think that Watson is maxing out their new well field.
No, but what, you must have done tests or somebody did tests on the Watson well field.
We didn't. We just observed the new facilities and talked to the,
Engineering supervisor.
engineers.
Well, it's like Watson, we reached out to them because we originally identified that well field. Wanted to partner with them. Is there any way, even though they've got it started, we could partner?
They're looking for partners.
Okay, can we possibly get funding for that?
I would say a high probability.
Okay, and the other ones were roughly the same way. Now, what happens if we make an agreement and we set this in motion? Do they still have control over their towns and stuff, or is it pretty much controlled by the county government?
You can set that up via the agreement, where the town and the water district could be the retailer.
Okay.
And you've got the county in essence serving as a coordinating wholesaler.
Because what we originally started out was, you see, back and forth entities, and if one doesn't want to get up the water, you can't have it developed. So we looked at this earlier, and our goal is anybody who needs water is to try and get it to them. So, I mean, if we did develop some of these fields we have around, and go back to some of the other towns.
But we represent a town that operates their own distribution system, and they buy water from the city of Syracuse and Aqua. So they control the whole water distribution system. You know, so that you can write the agreement any way you want.
Okay.
So they send out the bills and they get the revenue. They just reimburse the Onondaga County Water Authority and the city of Syracuse for the wholesale cost of the water.
Now, the one thing, I think you're, fighting too with the individual towns, I don't know if this is true, I'm just going from my experience, but, a lot of the communities that have their own wells, they would have a certain revenue. And even though you think their revenue goes back into the water, sometimes it slips over into their operating budget. And, I know for a fact, in one community I represented years and years ago, after I struggled to put in a 3 million gallon storage tank for them, and we only started out, we only used 1 million gallons. And I know there's a lot of debate when I did that and designed it, but it was on projections. I came back 15 years later, and they thought I was a hero because it was a cash cow for them. And I said cash cow, that wasn't lowering the rates per se. What that was doing was going into the general fund. I don't know how they can do that, whatever. But I think that's a little bit, the control is where's the funding, how's it impacting, not only just my water control, but is there money that can be shifted? Can I apply municipal personnel to a certain job versus sharing services? So we got to sort that out. It's not going to be easy, but what we always try to do is create a win-win. How can everyone in the community in Woods County benefit from this? It's not a win-lose. It's got to be a win-win.
If you will have only 2 DPW workers like Port Lyman, and one of them is funded under the books of the water department, and so is one of your pickup trucks out of the 2, and the county starts monkeying in that, then that's where some of that clinginess comes along.
Yeah.
The second thing is, we talked a lot about funding. The fact of the matter is, this report and the Southern Lewis Water Report say the same thing. Lewis County is already eligible for millions and millions and millions of dollars of infrastructure funding. We do not charge our residents enough water rates to qualify for USDA loans and funding. So we've got village boards and town boards that refuse to raise water prices, which I understand, it's a difficult thing to do, but they won't be eligible for funding unless they are willing to do that.
And I think, the other thing that we're seeing is, in this day and age, if you have a group like this together, you will get more funding, right? Because, the funding agencies will see that there is an organization that's in charge, but it's also see that they're just not supplying one town or one village, but it's a whole community as a whole, right? And then, the other thing, on a personal note, right? I mean, take all the technical stuff away, but, I've got 2 sons that are just graduating from college, and it would break my heart if my kids, moved to California. But what, to Terry's point, what we're seeing is, one of my kids has a job, and he's working with people in Boston, the other one's working locally, but they both live in the Syracuse area because they're doing it all via Zoom. So, from a personal standpoint, you don't want to lose your family and you want people to stay in Lewis County. I mean, this is a way to help do that, right? I mean, don't lose what you already have, and then maybe you get some more chips off the table in the water industry. And, some of the things that we talked about that may or may not be in the report, but, there could be, wood products jobs that come here. There could be hydroponics. There could be think tanks that think, this is a great place to work. And, it could spur some things along those lines. Those are just things that kind of come when you do something like this that's a little bit more progressive and, help, in the long term, help reduce costs and help increase the quality of life.
And again, you can move in this direction one step at a time. If that's the decision of all of you. Start with some cooperative agreements, and just build trust and move in this direction.
And I swore to my colleagues I wouldn't get into this too much into minutia, but I think Neil touched on it a little bit, right? I mean, if we were to move forward with this, there are ways that you can move forward with overlay zones and, different cost structures. So it doesn't have to be, one size fits all, right? I mean, Terry alluded to debt service in some of the towns. Like, those are all the things that will start to weigh into this so that we get something that's a win-win for everybody. Because that's honestly the only way you're gonna sell it.
I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And, you have some really good people in Lewis County. We're really impressed with the people we had a chance to talk to, and we had a chance to work with. Good people.
And by all means, if you have more questions, call them to Cassie and then we'll get back to you.
Ms. Anderson, the best.
Yeah.
We're lucky to have her. She is one of the best I've had an opportunity to deal with.
It's only because they're both Clarks and Grant.
I have an honorary degree from Texas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Engineering school, even an honor.